Good morning. I'm Bob, and I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober through the grace of God and Alcoholics Anonymous since the 10th of December, 1967, and for that I'm very grateful. Lynda and I would like to thank you all for the wonderful hospitality that we have received since we have been here. We come from Minnesota, which is, if this were the United States, it's in the middle of the United States in the northernmost part, so it touches Canada. We are colder than you are. We left 2 feet of snow and about 0 Fahrenheit to come here, and we find your country surprisingly warmer and beautiful. It is quite spectacular, but what we find most spectacular is the warmth and the hospitality of the people that we have met, and the spirit of the people in the AA and Al-Anon community is most noted. You know, it is. We have traveled many places, and there's an enthusiasm that is delightful. And if you keep that enthusiasm, great things will come of that. Lynda and I are going to share what we do, kind of back and forth. We haven't done too much of this type of sharing together, so we're going to play it a little bit by ear. I'm going to spend the first 15 or 20 minutes talking a little bit about our background so that at least you have some idea about how this old white-haired man came to be standing in front of you. I started drinking when I was 13 years old, when I was in high school. When I started high school, I was 4'11" and weighed 95 pounds. I was very unsure of myself. I thought everybody else got to school an hour early and held a meeting and decided what to do for the day, and I always missed the meeting. And I thought everybody else knew what was going on, and I didn't. And one night, when I was about 15, a friend of mine and I went out and we split a fifth of whiskey, and my life changed. It was an extraordinary change. I never felt like I was part of the group. After I had the whiskey, I felt like I owned the group. It was very different. And I chased alcohol very fast and very hard throughout my high school days. I went to a military school on a college campus, and we drank a lot in high school. Of my 5 closest friends, 4 of us are in AA and 1's in Al-Anon. So we did pretty well. When I finished high school, I had a reputation for having a drinking problem. I got into a lot of trouble. I got arrested. I made the false ID cards. I got sick a number of times. A couple of us almost died of alcohol poisoning. I went away to college to get away from the authorities and my father. And I drank my way out of the University of Notre Dame in the middle of my senior year. I walked out, which didn't please me or my family. And in the Army, I was in ROTC, and I had to get a medical release to get out of the Army. And the medical release I got was for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic when I was 19. And that seemed impossible. I got into a fight one night at a party, and my face hurt quite a bit, and I got fired as a waiter. They didn't want me serving food looking like I looked, so they fired me. And I had no place to go. I was out of all options, and I went back to my family and asked if I could come back home. And they said if I would not drink, I could come back home. I said I wouldn't drink. I lied, but I went back home. And when I went back home, I made the largest effort I had ever made to get my act together. I didn't like being who I was. I didn't like being the family problem. I didn't like crying myself to sleep listening to my parents argue about me. They didn't know what to do with me. No one knew what to do with me. They had me talk to a lot of people to try to help, and no one could help. And when I moved back in the house, I thought if I could change my life, change the circumstances of my life, it would be different. So I got a job. I got back together with Lynda. We had gone together for 2 years and broken up for the last year of my drinking. And I thought that if I got a good woman in my life, that would make a big difference. And we became engaged to be married. And I couldn't stop drinking. I just couldn't shut it down. And now I'm working in a company, and I'm the company drunk. I am like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I'm in trouble immediately. Big corporations like to have you come in on Mondays and like to have you stay on Fridays, and I'm a mess. And I quit that job after 6 months, and I took another job selling, which gave me more flexibility. And after I had the job selling for about 2 months, I woke up. One of my friends got married, and weddings were always good for about a week of drinking. And when I woke up in an apartment on Thursday afternoon, not having been to work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and I didn't know if I had a job or a fiance or a place to live until I was married, and I was done. And I called Alcoholics Anonymous. And 2 men came out and talked to me at a cafe. And those 2 men sat me down and shared their story with me. And in the process of them sharing their story with me, they changed my life. We have many traditions in AA. One of the most wonderful is that we share from our heart, from our experience, our strength, and our hope, not from our head. And when you do that, you can help change someone's life. And they touched me. I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that night. And that was in August or July of 1967. I drank twice after that. After 1 month of sobriety, I drank on a business trip. And after 3 months of sobriety, I drank on our honeymoon. And the last drink I had was on our honeymoon. And I'm glad that was my last drink. And I'll share more of that when I tell my story tonight. But I came back and I got active in AA. And they told me in AA that alcoholism was threefold. It was physical, but it was also mental and spiritual. And that once I crossed the line from problem drinking into alcoholism, my alcoholism affected me all the time, when I drank and when I didn't drink. The idea that my alcoholism could affect me when I didn't drink was a very new idea. I thought alcoholism only affected you when you drank. They told me that what AA was more than just not drinking. They said, "Have you ever stopped drinking?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Did it work?" I said, "No." They said, "It didn't work for us either. What we do in AA is once we quit, we use the 12 steps to change, to find a better way to live, so that we don't have to go back to drugs or booze to do something for us that we're unwilling or unable to do for ourselves. And if we don't change, we're not going to remain sober because we don't know how to live sober." That was one of the best things anybody told me. Lynda and I have gone together since Lynda's sophomore year in college, and we got married. We have 3 sons, 34 years old, 32 years old, and 23 years old. Lynda has been in Al-Anon since July of 1967. August of 1967. And that has been very important. I don't know that we would be married today if we each didn't have a program. Because when things go wrong, and they do go wrong, we turned our lasers on ourselves rather than on each other. I think we might have melted each other had we not had the program. It has been a wonderful partnership. It is. We've had a lot of alcoholism in our family, but we've had a lot of recovery. And we will, in the process of sharing, I've been sober 36 years, so I've experienced a lot of life in those 36 years. I'm 60 years old. I was 1 week into my 24th year when I got sober. I've experienced a lot of business difficulty and a lot of life. And I'll share more of that when I give my talk, but we have had success. We've had the big houses and the Mercedes and those sorts of things. And then when I was into my business career, about 12 years ago, I went broke. So, I went from doing very well to not doing horribly, and now I'm back doing pretty well. So, being sober does not guarantee that you will always have easy circumstances. It just guarantees that you will have the ability to deal with whatever circumstances that you have. So Lynda and I are going to share, and we're going to use the steps as a structure of sharing. And I guess we're going to talk for about an hour, including this part that I just did. We'll talk for the rest of the hour. And we've been talking about 15 minutes. And then we're going to have a question and answer period. We'll get as far into the steps as we can. And I'm going to talk, along with Lynda, about the steps in two different ways. One is about how they affected me when I first came in, and the other is how they affect me today, because it's different. And I'm going to talk about some problems in sobriety, because I think that most of us that are sober, we are not problem-free, and sometimes wonder about how the program applies to the daily living issues that we all have. And do you think of anything else at the moment to say? You want to stand up here with me when I...
No, just start with one.
You start with one and go...
I'll go in then one when you're done.
Okay. The first step said that we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. And the first step, I never thought I was powerless over alcohol. I knew I had trouble. I thought it was a bad ice or bad something. I didn't know what the problem was. It seemed like it was symptomatic. It seemed like alcohol was my answer, not my problem. Okay, I thought if you knew about my other problems that I had, you wouldn't think I was just an alcoholic. People would come to me and they'd say, if you would stop drinking, you'd be okay. Well, most of us have stopped drinking and using for some periods in our lives, and that wasn't okay. It wasn't okay at all. Just before I went back to my senior year at school, I got in trouble when I was robbed and rolled and pistol whipped and shot at and thrown out of the second story of a hotel. I ended up in the hospital. And I went back to school for my last year, and I did not drink for 3 or 4 months. And my life didn't become perfect. It didn't become as good as I thought it was going to become. It didn't become what I thought you were telling me it would become if I wouldn't drink. And I thought I proved that I could quit and that alcohol wasn't my problem, because I did quit and my life didn't get better. And it just didn't seem, but when I got to AA, you told me that alcoholism was a disease, that alcohol was only the symptom of the disease, that the disease was physical, but also mental and spiritual. And that if I was going to find permanent sobriety, which I didn't really want to find, I just wanted to get out of trouble. Most of us come here, we don't want to find, we're almost as afraid that it will work as we are that it won't work. And, but today, how that affects me today, and it was, when I came in, I had a surrender. And my surrender was for about 9 months. For about 9 months, I would ask a question and someone would give me an answer, and I believed whatever the answer was. But after about 9 months, my ego started to come back alive. And when you would answer a question, I wasn't sure you were correct. So all of a sudden, I started to assert myself in a different way. I wanted to find an expert on Bob in AA. I never found an expert on Bob. What I found is that Bob became an alcoholic, and I found experts on alcoholism. And that was how I learned about me, not by focusing on my personality or my ego, but by focusing on the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous and the issue of alcoholism. Today, I think a lot of us, when you get someone who's been sober a while and you want to help them, we all know what the answer is. The answer is surrender. But how do you tell someone how to surrender? How do you describe that? That's a very difficult thing. Most of us were surrendered by drugs and alcohol. We were beaten to a pulp. And we came in, was to some level of reasonableness because of the pain of our experience. But many of us today in the program are some distance away from that pain. We may not be using right now. And what happens is our powerlessness goes away. And all of a sudden we know the answer. We're not powerless. We're not unmanageable. We now believe because we're sober and we have this information that we can go about and conduct our lives the way we want to conduct our lives. It's always a difficult balance because many of the changes that we have to make in sobriety, we need some aspect of being teachable. Okay? If you're not surrendered, at least partially surrendered, you aren't very teachable. It's very hard to get information. All of us have had conversations with sponsees or with friends, and we know very well what they're willing to listen to and what they're not willing to listen to. And a lot of us are not willing to listen to what we don't want to hear. And therein lies, some of the problems today for us in recovery, because the universe, or your marriage, or your children, or your job will keep presenting you with what you're supposed to hear. And most of us, push it away, deny it, change it. So we aren't all that teachable. We aren't all that open. And so that's one of the things sometimes when we ask ourselves why we're in trouble when we're sober, one of the reasons we're in trouble is we don't listen very well. We're not open to what to what we're being told by God or the universe or our families. So I don't know if you...
Hi, I'm Lynda, and I'm a member of Al-Anon. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I'm getting sort of a kick out of this. My husband... What? Oh. Stop? Okay. My husband normally talks a lot faster than that, so I'm sitting over here listening to sort of this different tempo, and it reminds me of a joke you used to tell. I'm not going to tell you the joke, though. It's not appropriate. Thank you, everyone, for this incredible opportunity in your beautiful, beautiful country. We're having a great time. Step one, I'm sort of trying to look at this from the only eyes I have, which, of course, are the eyes of the Al-Anon, and how step one came in. And so I've been trying to sort of, I've been praying a lot, but also trying to think of times when I really felt like I surrendered. And there's one that's really profound, and it's, we have, as Bob said, we have 3 kids, and they're all in the program. And our middle son probably was the most difficult, although Dan gave him a pretty good run for his money, but he was, I think, the most difficult for me, maybe. And I used to say, if you don't run around with her, or if you didn't hang out with him, you'd be okay. And I would not want him to have certain friends over because I knew that when those friends were around that Peter was using more. I would refer to his friends as losers. If you didn't hang around with the losers, you wouldn't be the way you are. And the day came, and it was a hard day, when I realized that Peter was a loser. And Peter was hanging around with exactly the people he needed to hang around with to do exactly the things that he wanted to do. And it was one of those days when it was like someone hit me, you know, but it was a real surrender. And I knew that no longer did he have the choice. No longer could I deny the fact that he had a problem, and that he clearly was making the choices based on a disease. And it was a surrender for me. I realized there was unmanageability, but I certainly realized that I had absolutely no power. And alcoholics get beaten down by the disease, but Al-Anons get beaten down by it too. You know, we suffer, and because we love you, we hurt. We really hurt. So that's my story on step one that was profound. And do you want me to go into two and then? Okay, and then our second step says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And my insanity with the kids was that I could make them safe. If they did what I told them to do, and it was all, you know, it's all an illusion, but it was an illusion that I believed. So the reason for me, that's insanity, when you believe something that's not true to be true. And I thought that I could keep the kids safe. And, you know, the day comes when you know you can't. I used to kiddingly say, and I meant it though, I would like to have a nice box or cell in the basement, and I would put the kids in there, and I would bring very, very good food down to them, and we'd have nice videos with the VCR, and we'd have a very nice stereo, and their friends could come and visit in this controlled environment, and then I knew things would be okay. And of course it was a joke, but you know what? If I could have really made that happen, I would have given it a really good shot, you know. And so that was, I've got lots of examples of insanity, but that was one of them, that I had the illusion that there was something I could do to keep my kids safe. And when you really, I guess that goes back to surrender, when you really surrender, you realize there is absolutely nothing you can do to control another person. And I've learned that, in the program I've learned, there are two things in life that I have any control over. I used to have control over everything, or thought I did, but now I know there are two things. One is my relationship with my higher power, and the other one is my attitude. That's it. And if you knew what I thought I could control, you know, that's really quite a cut. So I guess I'll turn two over to you. Thank you.
I've turned Lynda into New York as a carrier. None of us were alcoholic when we met Lynda. I wasn't an alcoholic when I met her. Our children were not alcoholics. I think she carries the disease. And we're trying to have her inoculated, but we have not found a place yet where we can do that. I had a lot of problems in my drinking, and they were the problems that you expect drunks to have. I got arrested, I got in fights, I got in money difficulty. I was a gambler, a pretty good gambler, so that helped my money, I thought. And sometimes it didn't, but most of the time it did. I used to make money playing pool. Now I played with Schoolie the other night. That would not be a good way to make money. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, it was a revelation to me to find out that I had a disease and that it was incurable and that I had to, for the rest of my life, put certain principles into action in my life if I wanted my life to be okay. I thought it would be horrible. I didn't like people who didn't drink. I didn't trust people who didn't drink. I didn't like being around an audience. I mean, I wanted to hang out with people who were doing the same thing I was doing, you know, so that they wouldn't report on me. If I wanted to drink in the morning, I didn't want to be around 2 or 3 people that thought that was not what to do. You know, I don't need an audience. But when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I saw the people who quit. They were still having fun. they were alive. The humor was good for me to hear. Their lives were not over. They were, they seemed, they were attractive. Many of them had jobs that I thought were wonderful jobs. They owned houses. Their lives were in a lot better shape than mine was. So even though I was powerless, I was excited about the fact that I now had a program. I was excited about the fact that I thought I knew what my problem was. I thought my problem was I was an asshole. I was always in trouble. I was one of these kids that was attention deficit. I was in grade school. I got thrown out of grade school about 15 times. I was always in trouble. I couldn't keep my mouth shut. It wasn't bad stuff. It was just stuff. And, and I got to high school and I was smart, but so I got by. And, so when I came to AA, I really did come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. That power was AA. I had a difficult relationship with the church. Once I learned about sex and drinking, the church and I did not get along as well as we might have. And so I really didn't want much to do with church. But they made a distinction about spirituality, and I thought I could, maybe deal with that. But I was pretty uncomfortable even with spirituality. When the meetings got talking about too much God, I went to we used to break in two groups, and I'd go to the other group, hoping that they weren't talking too much about God at that moment. But I really came to believe that AA would restore me to sanity. I came to believe that my sponsor, I have the same sponsor that I have when I walked in the front door, which is not too many people. My sponsor's sober almost 50 years. He'll have 50 years in August. And he's 84 years old and still going strong. So I think he'll be there for it. And he was a great guy. He is a great guy. It's just a wonderful. We went over for coffee just before. We go over once or twice a week for coffee. Lynda's over there about as much as I am. His wife was Lynda's sponsor for many years before she died. And so it was with great hope that I thought, okay, I got the problem, AA's got the answer. And if AA's got the answer, the rest of the problems in my life ought to go away. Well, I had problems with work. I had problems with sex. I had problems with money. I had problems with gambling. I had problems with being married. I had problems with being a father. Other than that, I had no problems. I really didn't even know about those problems. I had all those problems in my first 9 months, and I never noticed them. Those problems were not on my first inventory. The first 4-step I took when I was sober 3 or 4 months didn't have those. I wasn't married when I took my first 4-step, and I wasn't a father when I took my first 4-step. But the other issues, the work problems and the money problems I had, my first 4-step was about all the horrible things I had done in my life that I was ashamed of, that I had told no one about. And that wasn't what the book only what the book recommends, but it helped me. Okay? Even, if you have a good attitude, even though you sometimes don't do it perfectly, you still get benefited by doing the process. I did the best I could, and it was okay. But after I was sober a while, the problems that I had in sobriety started to cause me great difficulty. I had a lot of difficulty with work. I had trouble getting to work. I had trouble getting up in the morning. I had trouble staying at work. I had some trouble working at work. Other than that, I did well at work. And I don't know what that was. That's not a problem that most people have, but it was a problem that I had. I don't know, and I don't know if I was lazy or whether I was scared or I didn't know exactly what it was, but I was not a very good worker. And so once I was sober about 1.5 years, my inventory started to change, and I started to have, by that time we had our first child, and I was starting to have arguments at home. Lynda thought I went to AA too much, and then she thought I didn't have a very good program. which I thought was none of your business. And she wondered if one of the places I was supposed to practice the program was in our home. I thought, well, that's none of your business either. So I had these problems, and I started to work on them, and I didn't want to have them, so I started to hide them. Now, when I first came in AA, I had a wall built up between you and me. I built this wall up so you couldn't see me. You couldn't see the unattractive. It says you like me, but you only like me because I let you see what you see. If you could see everything about me, you'd hate me, because I hate me. And who knows more what a terrible person I am than me? I was comparing my insides with your outsides. Okay? But when I came in AA, I hurt enough that I tore that wall down. And I said, hey, come and get me. I don't care who you are or where you come from, but come and get me and help me not be who I am anymore. I can't stand it 5 more minutes. And for the first time in my life, I shared all of me with someone else. I told them about all the things that I thought made me different, all the things that I thought made me dirty, all the things that I thought I did that were wrong. And in that process, I made a discovery. I'm not different. Okay? My personality may be different, but not my behavior, not my feelings, not my pain, not my alcoholism, not my experience. And for the first time, I started to have a hope that what worked for you would work for me. Before that time, I knew I was different. It never occurred to me that what worked for you would work for me. I was different. I was always different. I always looked for the difference. But when I came in and I surrendered and I tore down my wall and I allowed you in my fifth step, I felt the same. I felt similar. I felt enough the same that I thought AA could work for me. Well, when I started to have problems in sobriety, I started to build my wall back up. I said, thank you very much for helping me with my drinking problem, but stay out of my sex life. Thank you very much for helping me with my drinking problem, but stay out of my finances. Stay out of my parenting. Stay out of my marriage. Stay out of my job. And brick by brick, sober in AA, I built my wall back up. And I found myself feeling separate, going to many meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, reading the book, having sponsees, doing as good a job as I could with the steps at the time. I found myself, this was kind of almost unconscious. It wasn't like I was going to go against AA. I just did it instinctively. I had always hid things that I was afraid of, that I didn't know what to do with. And all of a sudden I started to have problems in sobriety that I didn't know how to deal with them, so I started to hide them. I was telling my sponsor about 65% of what was going on. Now, I know in Iceland you tell your sponsors 100%. And I think that is very good that you do that. But I was only telling myself about 65%. I wasn't strong enough to be able to even tell myself the truth of what was going on. I wasn't able to see the truth of what was going on. And I think that's just the way it is. I think that's the way it is for many of us. You don't get well all at once. You don't get rid of all the problems all at once. You get rid of the big chunks, and when you get rid of the big chunks, you can start to see the dogs. I was getting rid of the elephants. I couldn't see the dogs. But during the time, during the time that I had these problems and they were affecting me and I wasn't making much progress, I stopped believing in the second step. I believed it for you, but not for me. I no longer believed God was going to restore me to sanity because I was 3 years sober and in trouble. I thought AA was going to solve all my problems. But I'm 3 or 4 years sober and I got a lot of problems. So it doesn't look like they're going to go away. It doesn't look like AA is the answer. Maybe I am really screwed up. Maybe I need more. Maybe I'm different. And for quite a while, I felt somewhat isolated, even though I was right in the middle of AA, even though I had a sponsor, even though I was doing some of the right things. And I think to some degree, all of us have had part of that experience. I think that that's just part of, I just think that's part of the experience. But what I didn't know, and I'll talk about later, is that I had, when I was to change these things, when I had the very big change in my life at 6 or 7 years of sobriety, I had to go back and find step 2. And I didn't know that I had lost it, because I always believed it for us. I just stopped believing it for me, which is an interesting. Yeah.
Okay, step 3 is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And
You don't turn your will over to me?
see what I have to put up with. In that step, the word that I liked and still like the most is the word care. And when I think of how I am when I take care of something, I really try to give my full attention to that, and I try to be very gentle and nurturing and tending to the problem or the issue or the person as much as I can. And if I try to do that, I can imagine that my higher power does that a whole lot better than I do that. And so there's a great comfort in that word for me. And the other thing about it is, I don't believe that if, let's say this morning, I didn't get up and I didn't, say some prayers and turn my life over. I don't believe that because I didn't do that this morning, God says, you're out of my life today. I'm not going to, have nothing to do with you today. You're just going to sort of flounder on your own. I don't believe that happens. I believe I am in the care of God at all times. Whether I make that decision daily, 3 times a day, monthly, yearly, whatever, I believe I am in God's care. The thing that I think step 3 is for me is it's a step of cooperation. There's a plan for me, and my job is to show up for it, be present to it, and cooperate with it. When the plan is something I like, it's very easy for me to do that. I can do that with gusto. I can do that with great enthusiasm, and I look really good. But the days when it isn't to my liking, either I'm not feeling well, the people in my life are having issues, or they're not behaving. Once in a while, it's my turn. When I don't like the way life is going, it is still my job to cooperate with it, to be present to it, and to embrace it. And that's one of the things that the program has taught me. That has probably been the hardest thing for me, because I like to have my way. I really like to have my way. But the best thing for me is when I have my way and it pleases you too, then it's perfect. In other words, you do exactly what I want you to do, but you like it. Perfect. But my job in step 3, and I've learned it is not always going to be my way. But my job is to cooperate, embrace it, and do it gracefully. And not have to make it where, okay, I'm not going to get my way, but everybody else is going to pay for it. That doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for you either, but it doesn't work for me. Okay. Thank you.
Turn my will and my life over. Made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him. When I came in early in AA, it seemed like my whole attention was on mostly my drinking life. And so I had very little issue about turning my drinking life over to the care of God as I understood Him, and the care of Alcoholics Anonymous. I loved AA. A lot of people, the gift for me early in sobriety was that I thought AA was just fine. I worked with a lot of young people, and they didn't like AA. They didn't identify. I identified. Now, I had trouble living the program, but I didn't have trouble going to the meetings, and I didn't have trouble with the people. I liked The steps, I didn't always do them, but I liked them. And, and so forth. But I really didn't have any doubt that what they were talking about for me, about, that I had screwed up most of the things in my life, such as it was at that time through drinking. I knew I needed to quit. And I knew that I couldn't drink. I just never been, I could outdrink many of my friends, but I couldn't drink with any control. I had lost that ability. I had gotten in trouble time after time after time after time. I had just lost the ability to make that decision. I knew I was done, okay? The idea of turning my will and my life over I wanted my life to be better. Why the hell else would I go to Alcoholics Anonymous? Why would I admit that I'm powerless? Why would I have hope that God was going to restore me to sanity? What did I want to do? I wanted to be a man. I wanted to be like my father. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to have a career. I wanted to have, to be a success. I wanted to be very different, very different than what I was at that moment. And I really knew that what they were talking about in AA and the principles they were talking about would move me in the general direction that I needed to go. I had no argument with that. And for a long time, things were just fine. But when I started to have the problems in sobriety, when I started to hide them, when I started to have the unmanageability, when I identified the unmanageability, I thought, I'll just use the steps on the unmanageability, and I'll get rid of those too, just like I got rid of drinking. So I would take these issues on. I would take work on, or I would take being a father on, and I made very little success early on with these issues. I make some success, I would take 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. I felt like I was on the down escalator walking up. If I wasn't walking pretty fast, I kept going back down. And the other problem I had is I was doing a number of things in gambling and some of the other areas of my life that I knew I would have to clean up if I was going to be the kind of man that I wanted to be. And so it was like I knock on the door and God says, "Who's there?" And I said, "God, is Bob." And God says, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I want to turn myself in. I'm having a lot of trouble." And it seems like the people who have a better relationship with you than I have are doing better than I'm doing. So I want to turn myself in. And God's going to say, okay. And then you know what God's going to say? I'm going to say to God the same thing that all my sponsees say to me when they come over to the house. What do I do? And what do you think God's going to say? Get up in the morning. Go to work. Stay at work. Work at work. Be kind and loving to your children. Be kind and loving to your wife. Get on a budget. Don't spend more money than you make. Stop gambling. Stop smoking. Hell, if I could do all those things, I wouldn't need God. So my idea was, what's the use of developing a relationship with God if you can't fulfill the conditions of the relationship? So I felt if I open myself up to God, He's going to ask me to do a whole bunch of things I've been trying to do and can't do. So as soon as I get my act cleaned up, maybe I'll go over to God. But right now, I'm screwed. I don't know what, I'm caught in the middle. And I stayed in the middle for a long time. And I think a lot of us think that if we really turn ourselves over to God, we're going to end up in China as missionaries, or we're going to, it's going to be a very dull life, And I really think we have an idea that there isn't any fulfillment of ourselves in that process. Certainly no sex, probably no money, but for sure no fulfillment. And so I really think that I was afraid of God. I think I was afraid of what I would have to do. I think I felt like I couldn't do the things that I really needed to do. And I think I think a lot of us are conflicted around those things, and many of us don't have that conversation. We don't have it with, I know I didn't have it with my sponsor, and haven't, with the regularity that I wish I have had some of that conversation with my sponsees. And now I'm starting to do that with more depth. I'm not as worried about scaring them. We're just having a conversation about what they think about their relationship with their higher power, and what they're afraid of or not afraid of. And I think a lot of us are out of touch with our values, especially a lot of the younger people today. They haven't had quite as traditional an upbringing. I feel like we're, certainly in the United States, I feel like we're losing some of our contact with the core values. And a lot of these kids who start using it 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 years old weren't connected with anything, when they came in the program. So I agree with Lynda. When I finally woke up at 7 or 8 years, which I will talk about later, that I realized that my life, I'm an ant on a log going down a river. It looks like I'm steering it, but it's an illusion. My life is right now, has always been, and will always be in the care of God as I understand it. That's the relationship. It's the nature. That's just the way it is. And I really think that part of what happens to us as we walk through our recovery is we become more aware. We become more conscious. And we strip away some of the things that stop us from seeing, and we start to feel ongoingly that connection. Where when we're early in our recovery or not in recovery, our egos are the only thing we can feel. And when our egos are in charge, we're separate. We're different. We're in our tanks with the slit, with the machine gun, driving through life, shooting people. We do not feel connected. We don't feel part of. We don't feel God-centered. We feel different and antagonistic. And those are the two choices we seem to have. Have a God-centered life and suffer the consequences, or a self-centered life and suffer the consequences. Very different experiences in those things. But it takes a degree of trust that many of us do not have to turn your will and your life over to the care of your higher power and to rely on that. Most of us, if people asked us, we experience a great deal of fear, a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of pain, a great deal of stress. Those are not symptoms of having a strong relationship with a higher power. Those are not symptoms. I mean, those are symptoms of people who feel that they have to make certain things happen in the world, or the world's not going to be okay. And that, which is how I often feel like I've got to get the deal done. This is for money. I better handle it. I feel like I'm in the real estate development business and real estate investment business. I have, and the management business. I have 300 or 400 employees that we have. This is not you have to meet the overhead and do different things, and, you kind of feel like it's I have to, we have, and all of a sudden you feel like you're in charge of this bloody thing, when that's kind of an illusion too. You'll certainly have responsibilities in that process, but you are not God. And when you feel like the buck doesn't stop with you, I mean, when you don't have to explain everything that happens in life, when you can trust, when you can just have a sense that it's going to be okay, when you can allow other people to have their experience and their feelings. I used to, every time Lynda would get upset with me, which was fairly often, when I would go give AA talks, I was gone 20 weekends a year giving AA talks, and she'd always say, I wish you wouldn't go. And what I'd hear was, you are a jerk, you're leaving us again, I don't like it, goodbye. But what she meant was, I wish you weren't going. Okay. And I would think that I would have to change her mind so that she wouldn't feel that way. And that wasn't my job. It's not, to have allow someone to have the dignity of being where they are and who they are and how they see some of that. It's not my business. But for a long time it was my business. How my children thought, how they felt, what they said, controlling all those things. And so there's today what it means to me to turn my will and my life over to the care of God is to try to trust what is going on as being okay. To have a kind of sense that what I'm in front of today is okay. That the universe is unfolding as it should. that my job is adjusting to that. They told me early on in AA there's two ways to be happy. Get what you want, which isn't all that likely, or change the way you react to whatever does happen. And they said, you can do that, and that isn't dependent upon any other human being. That was a fascinating idea for me. I didn't do it very often early on, but I do it today. I really have a sense that my job is just to be in front of what's going on and to adjust myself to what that is and try to maintain an attitude that it's okay. And to me, that's how my relationship of turning my will and my life over to the care of God shows up. And whether I'm able to just to be in the day, be in the moment. I was always running away from yesterday, running towards tomorrow, what had to happen tomorrow to make my life okay. My salvation was in the future. It was never now. And today, it's now. So, that's about, and then we're going to do questions, and that's about an hour, isn't it? Or not quite, but we'll do that.